Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. We're going to talk about absolute value today. On that review or on that rewind though, just really quickly, number 2. How do you do that? Jesse? Okay. Can you change it to a decimal? You could. It's just longer. It's not like multiplication with fractions. You don't have to find a common denominator, so you just end up with what? 9. Over 16. Yeah, and then it's done. Okay, so to me, that's easier than changing it to a decimal. It's not wrong if you do it as a decimal, but this is a particularly complicated decimal. It ended up being like 0.5 something, Ellie, you had it, right? It was like 4 digits, right? So you had to do a lot of work until you got there. So it might just be easier to leave it as a fraction. I don't care which you do. And again, remember when we're in chapter 2, you guys will start being able to use calculators. So really it's like a moot point. You won't need to, it doesn't really matter which way you prefer to do it. All right, how do you change 2/5 into a decimal? 2 divided by 5. So the 2 goes inside, the 5 goes outside. Is that the same as this? No, those are very different. Okay, so this is not right. The numerator goes inside, and then I can't fit 5 into 2, so what do I do? But if I'm going to add a 0, I have to add a, and then bring it up. All right, 5 goes into 20 how many times? 4. All right, do you need the 0 in front? No, 0.4 is the same as 0.4, but is this wrong? No, that's just fine. Okay, so if it helps you to keep track of it, to put that 0, by all means do. All right, this is a mixed number. What mixed number is this? 2 3/4. It's hard on this to see, I know that sometimes, but what does that look like as a decimal then? Good. 2.75. Now, you can do the division 2 different ways. So you can either do, what did you say? 3 divided by 4 and just do this part, because you know that the whole number is going to be what? 2. Okay, and that ends up giving you 0.75. Or what's another way to do it? Dejna, you did it differently. What did you do? Yeah, but this isn't the division you did. You did different division. What did you do first with 2 3/4? Okay, so you ended up with like 11 over 4, right? And then you did 11 divided by 4. So what did she do first? She turned it into improper fraction. Will she get the same thing? Yes, absolutely. Well, if she does it right, which she did. So she ended up getting 2.75 as well. Okay, any of those are options. It doesn't really matter. I typically do this one because I already know what my whole number is going to be. So I typically do that, but it doesn't matter. Okay. What is absolute value? What is absolute value? Elijah?
Yeah, absolute value is the number on the number line.
What does that mean, though? Adrian? Okay, can you say that again? Very good. How far a number is from 0. So the distance from a number to 0 on a number line. All right, so the distance from a number to 0 on a number line. How do we express it? Like, what does it look like? How do you know when you're looking at an algebraic expression that what symbol means absolute value? Jessica? Yeah, it's like 2 parallel vertical lines, right? So we would say something like this. This is the absolute value of 12, okay? So you're asking yourself, how far away is 12 from 0? Well, how many spots does it take to get from 12 to get to 0 on a number line? Good, so the absolute value of 12 is, what's the absolute value of negative 12? Positive 12. Why is it 12 still?
Because
You take 12 steps. Does it matter which direction you're going? No, distance is always going to be what kind of number? A positive number. Distance is always positive. So if I say something to you like, I'm going to walk down to the cafe and it's going to take me 200 steps to get there. So let's say I walk 200 steps to the cafe and then I come back to my classroom. Am I taking negative 200 steps when I go back? No, I'm still taking 200 steps. What did I do though? I just kept walking. Did I go the same direction or a different direction? Different direction, but does it matter? Am I still taking positive steps? Yeah, because you can't walk somewhere negative. I can't go negative 8 miles to get somewhere. Okay, so distance is always going to be positive. So essentially, absolute value takes whatever you have and turns it into what kind of number? A positive number. What do you think the most common mistake people make is with absolute value? They turn a positive into a negative. It should never be negative, right? It should not be negative. If you're taking the absolute value of something, it's always going to become positive. All right, because again, we're talking about distance. So even if I'm going from negative 8, I'm just taking, like Emmanuel said, I'm just taking some steps until I get to 0, and I just want to know how many steps I took. I took 8 steps to get there. I didn't take negative 8 steps. I just took 8 steps to the right. All right, so what's the absolute value of 6? What's the absolute value of negative 6? What's the absolute value of 8 minus 12? 4. Why? How do you do this? How do you simplify an algebraic expression when it involves absolute value? Do you take the absolute value individually, or do you do what's inside first? Do what's inside. Absolute value signs act kind of like what? Parentheses. They act like parentheses. So an absolute value sign and what's the rule with parentheses? Do what's in it first. Good. So in PEMDAS, P comes first. We could kind of consider it PA because absolute value is going to come first. You got to do whatever inside first. So here you did 8 minus 12, and that gave you what? Negative 4, but the absolute value of negative 4 ends up being positive 4. Good. What if you had something like this? What would that give you? Negative 8. Elijah, why? Okay, so what's the absolute value of negative 8? Positive 8, and then there's a negative sign outside, so your answer ends up being negative 8. Does that mean the absolute value is negative? No, the absolute value is still positive, but where was the negative sign? Outside of it, so it doesn't get negated or canceled out. All right, so let's take a look at a couple simplification expressions. So in this first one, what am I going to do first? The absolute value. So I've got to simplify what's in the absolute value first. I'm going to move this down a little bit. Okay, so the first actual math problem I'm going to do here is what? Negative 2 plus 5, because they act like parentheses, so I'm going to do what's inside there first. Are my signs the same or different? Different, so do I add or subtract? Subtract, and I end up with a what? 3. Positive or negative 3? Good, so 13 plus the absolute value of 3 minus 6. Well, what's the absolute value of 3? 3. So then I've got negative 13 plus 3 minus 6. Now, order of operations tells me if all I have is addition and subtraction, I just go what? Left to right. So negative 13 plus 3 would be what? Negative 10 minus 6. Negative 16. Very good. All right, negative 16. Perfect. So again, our absolute value is going to be the first thing that we do because it acts like it's a set of parentheses. In this problem, is there even anything to simplify in the absolute values? No, it's just a couple numbers. So how do we write this one? So it's a negative 8 becomes a positive 8. This becomes a, and then minus 9. And we leave minus 9 alone because there's no absolute value signs. So 8 plus 14 is 22 minus 9, 13. Good. All right, and that's it. So negative 16 and positive 13 for those. So when we're simplifying with absolute values, the most important thing to remember is that absolute values should always be positive, and you do it first because it acts like parentheses. Very good. All right, try these 6. Okay, so sometimes the absolute values are going to be a little bit more complicated, or we might just have a longer string of them that involve mixed stuff like multiplication, division. Still following order of operations. Absolute values do act like parentheses, but we still have to follow that PEMDAS order of operations just like we would if they were parentheses. So what would I simplify first in this problem? The 27? Okay, the absolute value of 27 is, all right, over the absolute value of 3. Okay, stays at times 5 times, and then do I have to do this next? So what's negative 2 minus 3? Negative 5. How do you know it's negative 5? Same sign, so you add. So it's going to be negative 5. What's the absolute value of negative 5? 5. Good. So that becomes 5. 27 over 3 is what? 9. So 9 times 5 times 5. Now since it's all multiplication, I just go left to right, or you can do whatever is easiest for you first, because multiplication is commutative, so the order doesn't matter. So to me, 5 times 5 gives me what? 25. And this is easier because in my head, I can think of this like money. This is like a quarter. If I have 9 quarters, how much money do I have? $2.25. Okay? Now, for some reason, if I ask people to just mentally do 9 times 25, no one would be able to do it that quickly. But when I'm like, oh, it's like quarters, all of a sudden people are like, ooh, money, I like money, I can do that. So if that helps you to think about things like money, then by all means do it. Okay? Or you could do 9 times 5, which is 45, times 5, which is still going to give me 225. So either way, my answer is 225. All right, this one on the left, what am I going to do first? 18 times 2. Good. What's 18 times 2? 36. What's the absolute value of 36? Okay. Absolute value of 3. Absolute value of 12. And then 4 is just alone. All right, now what do I do next? I have a couple options. I could find common denominators and add, or I can say, yeah? I could make them, yeah, whole numbers, right? Because these go in evenly. So which do you think I would opt to do first? Turn them into whole numbers, because if these go in evenly, then finding a common denominator there is going to end up giving me a really big number because the denominator would be 12. I don't want to do all that. So I'm going to take a look at this like it's a division problem. 3 goes into 36 how many times? 12. And 4 goes into 12 how many times? So now I just have 12 plus 3, which is 15. Would I still get the same thing if I changed the denominators to 12? Yes, it would just be a huge number that I would then have to reduce. Okay, and ultimately my answer would still be 15. All right, what's going to happen in this second one?
That whole number is going to put in.
What part do I do first? 6 minus 2, which is 4. Absolute value of 4 is 4. Okay, what's that going to give me? Negative 3. How come it's negative even when we said absolute values can never be negative? Because it's outside the absolute value. Good, so then my answer ends up being negative 12. All right, so I'm done there because there's nothing else to simplify. Okay, do 3 of them. Any 3 you want.